Hello. Most of you, even the farthest flung of you, will have heard of Tommy Robinson. Many of you will also have heard that he was arrested 2 days ago outside Leeds Crown Court. I'm not changing the subject when I tell you that for a long time, just before I started recording this, there was a wasp stuck under the roof window. We've got Velux windows in the roof here in the attic where I've set up my office, and when I saw the wasp was trapped, I opened the window as wide as it would go, it sort of opens out like that. But the wasp kept trying to head upwards straight into the glass, while access to the sky was only a few inches away around the window frame. But the wasp kept banging itself straight upwards into that glass until, by random chance, it bounced itself more or less to one side and finally escaped round the edge. That's what some people do as well. Sometimes chance throws them into the right route, but otherwise they just keep on hitting that glass until they wear out from exhaustion or somebody squashes them. They can see the sky and freedom or their particular shining goal or whatever it is, it's right there, but there's this block between them and it, and they keep hitting that block because they don't know what else to do. Now, to go over the facts as I've been able to ascertain, Robinson had a suspended sentence. That is, he'd been found guilty of something, I don't know what, jaywalking or whatever, and he'd been sentenced, but they weren't going to put him in jail so long as he behaved himself. A couple of days ago, he did not behave himself, so they arrested him and applied the sentence as previously handed out. Now, would anyone else have been arrested for doing what he did? I seriously doubt it. They might have had a warning, but they wouldn't have been arrested. Because I also have absolutely no doubt that the authorities of various sorts in this country do not want him or his ideas to prosper. But he did deliberately sail very close to disaster. That is, it's an established part of British law that the public, whoever they are, relatives, journalists, onlookers, anyone, aren't supposed to harass or photograph the accused on their way into court to stand trial. Apparently, that's what Robinson did. I didn't see it, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that at one point he started shouting at one of the men. I don't know what he shouted, but for sure, that's a definite no-no. And it's dangerous, not only because it's harassment, but because the criminals could have been handed a case for the verdict to be set aside on the grounds that the trial was prejudicial. For instance, that jury members could have seen or heard the strength of public feeling against the accused, and that might skew their perception of the facts as laid out during the course of the trial. Now, do the police arrest everyone who does this? No, they bloody don't. It used to be a pretty common thing, especially in child sex and murder offences, for instance. Groups, mobs really, usually of women, would gather outside the court to howl their displeasure at the prisoners on their way out of the paddy wagon and through the court doors. Did the police arrest any of them? Well, I didn't hear of it. Did the BBC report on these women as dreadful examples of intolerance? Again, I didn't hear of any such thing. To backtrack a bit, I said this used to happen. I haven't heard of it happening with these cases, even though children were involved. Do women no longer care about children? No. So what appears to be happening is that even what you might call the rabble have been infected by a terror of being politically incorrect. In fact, there's been a thick blanket of silence over this issue in the press and even amongst the sort of people who watch TV rather than the internet. I was off the internet for a few days, as some of you know, if you saw my previous video. That's because we were moving, and apart from the sheer exhaustion of the job, I didn't have my computers set up. It's an instructive experience, by the way. I discovered that when I got back onto the web, I was hideously badly informed. Things that us internet nerds take for granted just weren't penetrating my consciousness. It was an object lesson in the democratic power of the web. I didn't even know about the Robinson thing until late on the Thursday night. There wasn't anything about it on the radio. The Independent reported on it a day later. Note how he's described as far right, and also note how his activities are defined as reporting, in quotes. Nothing like a bit of well poisoning, is there? Eh? Independent? You may wonder why the government, because ultimately that's where all of this must be coming from, is damping down on this stuff. I can't give you an answer for sure, but I can chuck forward a couple of guesses. The first is that the people in government have become convinced that any publicity beyond the most minimal is going to cause the populace to be so angry that there'll be riots in the streets. I suppose they're worrying that such disorder could spill over into public anarchy, and they're doing their best, as they see it, to avoid that. If that really is their plan, it's not going to work too well, judging by the demo outside Downing Street on Saturday afternoon in support of Robinson. The other possibility, of course, is votes. Despite a lot of media hype, which gives an erroneous impression, Muslims are only a fraction of the British public, no more than 5%, I believe. And of that, Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslims are an even smaller part, just over half of the Muslim population, so maybe about 3% of the total. But they are mostly concentrated in and around centres of high density population, like London, Birmingham, Coventry, Nottingham, Manchester, Bradford, Leeds, Middlesbrough, Newcastle and Glasgow, the big towns. And because of the nature of their religion and the tribal structure, which many of them have replicated in the city streets now their homes, within those areas they form highly cohesive interest groups. Having worked on the outskirts of politics for a while, I'm aware that, for instance, local ethnic Pakistani community leaders have been known to collect the postal votes of members of their community, very often semi-literate women, and fill them out themselves, all voting for a single candidate of their choice. Not necessarily a Pakistani, but somebody upon whom they can rely for the correct attitudes. This isn't speculation. There's been reporting of this in various areas of Britain for years. In August 2016, which isn't so long ago, Sir Eric Pickles, a Conservative cabinet minister, published a very long overdue report about such practices. This is what the BBC said. Sir Eric's report said he had seen evidence of pressure being put on vulnerable members of some ethnic minority communities to vote according to the will of the elders, especially in communities of Pakistani and Bangladeshi background. He added that the government was in a state of denial about election fraud amongst these cultures. And my guess is that this is the root of the problem all the way through, because politicians get elected. And they're worried about the election bloc formed by the Pakistani Bangladeshi communities in Britain. No, I do not say the Muslim communities, because although Islam is a big factor, it isn't the only factor. And I'm quite sure that the voting patterns of minority Muslim groups, such as Ismailis or Ahmadis, for instance, isn't even close to any sort of consensus, even though they do form communities of their own. So, back to Tommy Robinson, the Wasp, banging his head against the window. What he did was wrong, misguided, or rather it was bad tactics, but it was understandable because He can't see any other way to draw to the attention of the public and to overcome the inertia and lack of, well, generalship which saturates our government and civic authorities. I don't know what the answer is, but we can't just stand by and do nothing. I donated to the Tommy Robinson's Fund. I'll put a link below, and I urge you to support him as well. He'll probably need all the help he can get over the next few days.